In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God. Amen. What's up? How you guys doing? Good? It's dead energy today. What's going on? Because today we're going to be talking about fire, like being on fire. And the heat out there, it makes you feel like you're being on fire, but I'm talking about a different type of fire. So I need y'all's energy a little bit, okay? How are you guys doing? Good. All right. It's like a 2 out of 10. That's cool. All right. So we were going to conclude today with this series, God is, therefore I am. But turns out there's a lot more to talk about. So there's going to be one more week. So next week is going to be the last week. And for those of you who have not been following this series, it's based on a book called Elements, the Transfiguration of Elijah. Elijah, not the character in the Bible, but an individual who lived in the 1980s, 90s in Canada. And this book was written by an Orthodox priest. It's a novel, so there's some creative liberty, but the story follows this person's journey and that person's transfiguration. We talked about what transfiguration is, this metamorphosis, this change from what we are to what God intended for us to be, and the potential that God has instilled in us. And this transformation, this transfiguration, and this journey requires steps, certain steps. A lot of them are linked with an external journey, but really the journey is internal. The journey is of the heart. So the journey does go from earth, and we talked about the first week, we talked about how before anything, before we were influenced by the world, we had this sense of innocence, this sense of wonder, this sense of newness, authenticity to everything around us. And over time, that gets blunted. And over time, we assume the identity of the world around us, which in itself is confused. So we assume a confused identity. And we talked about the me too. We want to, it comes from a good place. We want to belong. So we say me too to things to have fellowship with others. But that slowly erodes who we are to the point where we don't know who we are. So coming back to that personhood, that creation, was the second week, talking about earth, becoming creation. And we talked about earth being humility, as in what humility means for us, the created beings, is just knowing we are created. That's all humility means. Understanding where we are, who we are. Just think about it. A lot of times we think we're in control. That's almost the opposite of humility, right? We might think we're in control, but we're not. So what humility asks for us is just to see the reality. To see the reality that we are created, we're part of the created being. And that sort of brings us back to being our true self. And we talked about how wisdom is found in how we live, not how we think. How we think and meditating on things can take us to a certain degree, but our whole being has to be involved in this journey. Our flesh, our body has to be involved, our mind has to be involved, our spirit has to be involved in the journey into becoming earth. And then we talked about the following week how after earth, you continue to dig, and there's this great imagery of digging actual earth. And if you guys don't know, when they try to find a well, they dig so far down, and then water starts coming out of the earth. So there has to be this digging of ourselves into getting to the different levels of ourselves, the different layers of our hearts. And Water is likened to the Holy Spirit. When we assume water, we're being moved left to right by the Holy Spirit. There's this image of a flask in the shape of a cross. And when you pour water in anything, it assumes the shape of that thing, right? And for us to be like water is to assume the shape of our circumstances, right? When God says, and for that to happen, we have to be earth. We have to be in tune with ourselves. And then we are able to be sensitive to the voice of God, right? We know in the Old Testament to see how does God speak. It's not in the thunder, it's not in the lightning, it's not in the earthquake, it's in the whisper. So that whisper means there's a level of sensitivity that's needed from us. And for us to get there, we have to continually try to get to the earth, the core of who we are. A lot of times that gets mingled by the distractions in our lives. So we don't necessarily have time for ourselves, but we have time for entertainment, for things that will take us out of ourselves. And so, we end up not knowing who we are. So water goes to the lowest place. And it's a great analogy in the book, how this, everything that we're asked to do, that it's crazy how Christ did it, right? For earth, for example, Christ gets incarnated into earth. And his humility is actually a real humility, because he goes from the position he is, which is infinite, and comes down to our position. What we're asked to do is just be our position. We go up this position that really doesn't exist. We go up a position and say, we're the God of our lives. We're the captain. I'm the captain of my own ship. But that's really not the case. So it's an illusion that we continually feed ourselves. Whereas God, he is really God, right? He is Word. When we say God is love, and we'll talk about that later, because that's what today's talk is going to be about. That is who he is. Even names, for example, it's Ahai, right? It's Ahai. The person called Ahai is not really the sun, right? It's just, that's her name. But God, when we say God is like light, it actually, that's what he is. The word describes what he is. It's not a name that's given to him. It's what he is. And so God comes to earth, becomes earth, and then gets baptized into the water. He becomes water. And then we'll talk about how he is crucified to resurrect, to become flame. So going from last week, we talked about this thing about mucking. What is mucking? Well, there's in a barn, none of us, I would think, are familiar with farm work. I just recently found out about this, but the fact that a grown cow can poop a teenager in weight, like about 70 or 60 kilos, 140 pounds a day. And so the people in the barn, they would have to clean that out. And in the story, Elijah found himself in a farm, and part of his job was to wake up early in the morning and clean out this poop, right? And that's mucking. That's what mucking is. But the idea, the imagery there is he has to use his body. His body has to understand that it takes energy. It takes work. It actually takes daily work to do this. Like if he were to stay to ease off for 2 to 3 days, well, it's going to be to the point where he won't be able to clean it out. It will be too much. And we liken this to the poop thoughts that we get daily. We get about from 40 to 70,000. I know that's a big range. 40 to 70,000 thoughts a day. And most of them are fed through us from the world, from what we see, our surroundings, right? Your worth is based on this. The way somebody looked at you, or if somebody smiled at you, or complimented you, or a family member, or anything. Look, it all says that your worth is not necessarily based on God, because the world is not preaching God. The world is away from God, right? So most of the thoughts that come in are ones that need to be cleansed, that need to be mucked out of the barn, which is the heart, right? And you need the body to actually work. And in Elijah's story, this solidified, like the fact that he was waking up early in the morning and cleaning the dirt, how much the dirt was, and the fact that he was cleaning it, and the fact that he had to tire, he had to have effort. All of that is etched in his heart. And his body is part of his his body participates in his salvation. His body participates in his journey. So when we were talking about earlier how wisdom and growth and salvation cannot be found just by thinking, is because our body has to be involved in it. Because it feeds into our minds. So Elijah understands, if you've been for a long time doing this work, he understands, this requires a lot of work, right? And then he understands how much he has to clean and how much vigilant he has to be. So mind, body, and spirit needed in this work. And then why are we cleaning this barn? Why are we cleaning it? Well, we know in the story that the Lord becomes incarnated, becomes earth in a barn, right? Our barn is just a barn until the King of Kings dwells in it. Then it's a temple. And how does that translate to our lives? Well, healing. When God reigns in our lives and our hearts, there is a healing that occurs. The healing part is not ours. We can't really heal ourselves. So you can't just go for a walk and meditate and feel like you're healed. That's not how it works. We don't have the ability to heal ourselves. We have the ability to clean out things and empty it, but we have to bring God in, because if God doesn't come in, well, the crap comes back in. The dirt comes back in. So he becomes the reign and the king of our lives. Today we're going to talk about fire. It says, Abba Lot went to see Abba Joseph. These are just desert fathers. And said to him, Abba, as far as I can say, my little office, my little barn, I fast a little, I pray and meditate, I live in peace. And as far as I can say, as far as I can I purify my thoughts. What else can I do? He asks him. Then the old man stood up and stretched his hands towards heaven. His fingers became like 10 lamps of fire. And he said to him, if you so desire, you can be all flame. If you so desire, you can be all flame. This transfiguration, when I say, and the book talks about this, these happen in steps. It's in during the time of becoming water that they say it's in steps. It comes in steps. But everything comes in steps. Becoming earth comes in steps. Becoming water comes in steps, and becoming fire also comes in steps. You are not just flesh, you are a spirit. That's why we can't stop at earth. Earth is understanding who we are, getting to the state of our being. But that's not all who we are. We're also spirit. God breathed into Adam. He made him immortal. He made him a spirit. Earth must be immersed in water first, then receive the fire of love. That's what the fire is. It's love. Christ says, I've come to bring fire on earth, and how I wish it were already on fire. God is not pyromaniac. It's just that fire is love. He said, I've come to bring fire on earth. Songs of Songs says about love. It burns like a blazing fire, like a mighty flame. Unless one is born from above, his or her heart cannot be on fire with the love of God. John the Baptist, talking about Christ, says, he will baptize you with the Holy Spirit and fire. To be this fire, there are things that we need to die to. So we follow Christ, right? He becomes earth and water. He says, although he himself is God, says, let it be according to you. The will of the Father. The Holy Spirit moves him from left to right, water. And then there's the crucifixion. Before the fire, before the resurrection, we have to die to something. We have to die to ego. We have to die to attachments, multiple things. We have to die to self. Die to self. It says in Philippians 3:10 that I may know him and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his suffering, being made comfortable unto his death. There are certain words that don't match here. Comfortable and death. Who's comfortable in death? And one of my favorite phrases in the Bible, fellowship of his suffering. A lot of times we miss this. Fellowship of his suffering. What do we focus on? The suffering part, right? But what else is there? Fellowship. The fellowship part. The fellowship part is what makes the suffering even, dare I say, joyful. The fellowship part is what makes it all worth it. Dying to self. It says, those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passion and desires. When one dies to ego, it talks, the story follow. Again, I'm trying not to give up parts of the story, but we're going to have small groups and book club for the book, because in that way we can discuss in depth the specifics of the book. But there's a point where you can see Elijah actually becoming fire. Right? His life, everything he touches just catches in flames in a good way. It becomes alive. It becomes light. And you can see that for that to happen, Elijah had to forget who he was. He had to forget himself. Ego reminds us of ourselves. Ego says, I'm the center of the universe. The problem with that is you're not. That's the problem. You're not. And the reason why, that's sad is because it's a cycle. You become the center of the universe. So everything revolves around you in your mind. That's it. Outside of you, that's not true. But in your mind, that's your reality. And that becomes a problem because, that leads to death. Because it's a fake reality. It's not the reality that will lead to life. Elijah did not care what others thought of him because he had totally forgotten about himself. There's a complete freedom in this. And when you are the center of the universe, you know this to be true. You're not free. You're caring so much about what so and so someone thinks of you. You have a certain image of yourself, and you try to uphold that image. I used to be this, I still have to catch myself for this, but I found out my personality is like a chameleon, where I can assume, I think it's being able to adapt, but I can adapt to any type of environment. And I remember at one point, it got to the point where, well, who am I really? Because I can get along with anyone and we can have conversation about anything, and that's great. But you get sort of lost in that image, and you start acting to uphold that image, and you end up saying like that I don't really care about this, and that doesn't bring you any joy. You're doing it for someone else, right? And that is slavery. That's slavery. That's willingly I'm being enslaved to appeal to something else that's not who I truly am. And the part of the human condition is that we have the tendency to medicate our pain by throwing ourselves headfirst into that very thing that caused us the pain. Why is that? Because it's familiar. That's one of it. You know? And we talked about, this is a joke, but we talked about that if you're Habesha or Abesha, I don't know, like either way is fine. You have either ridden in a Honda or a Toyota, or like if you don't know anyone in your vicinity who has a Honda or a Toyota, you're not Abesha. That's plain and simple. And I remember like having like a Toyota that really like it was a Honda, and I had to change the engine. That's how bad it was. But guess what the next car that I bought was? A Toyota, a Toyota. The familiarity of things. So that's sort of a joke. It's we tend to go to the thing that's familiar, right? But even if it causes pain, we go back to the familiar. And that's also the problem. When you go back to the familiar, it causes more pain. You're also getting worse. The disease is getting worse. You still go back to it. And so the depth of hurt and disease just continues to grow. Pleasant emptiness. But it doesn't end there. It doesn't end at pleasant emptiness. It becomes numb, and then later becomes death. Attachments. Die to attachments. We have to die to live. Love will always cost us our lives. If you were to take one thing today, and I'm going to say that about like 4 or 5 different things, so take 4 or 5 things. But one of the things is love will always cost you your life. But don't end there. That's not the end of the story. Because the life that is going to cost you, that always leads to death. So really, you're giving up death. It's just that we're so attached to death that it's become life to us. We're so attached to death that it's become life to us. But guess what? It's death. Like, no matter how much it's become life to you, in the end, it's death. That's the same thing we're talking about. You have your reality. But that quote-unquote reality, it's not real. And that reality it's a ticking time bomb. It has an end, and that end is death. So love will always cost you your life. If it's not costing you your life, it's not love. But that life that it costs you, it's going to always lead to death. In Galatians 2:20, it says, I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live. Yet not I, but Christ lives in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God, who loved me and gave me himself for me. He must increase, I must decrease. I love this picture. And I used to think the reason why I love this picture is like, oh, okay, God, like if it's a difficult thing or something that like I have to give up, God has something else for me, right? So this picture was an image of that. Oh, God has something else better for me, right? That's what the picture shows, right? A bigger teddy bear for this car. That's what I used to think, but the reason why I love it now is what's the goal here? Is it the bigger teddy bear? Because guess what? You get the bigger teddy bear, you're going to be attached to that. Really, the goal is him, Christ himself. But this picture is so beautiful because although the goal is him, he's so patient that he'll continue to give you things. Right? A lot of times, the way love graduates, initially we love God for what he does for us. We initially love God for the things. But if we continue to grow, if we continue to do the mucking and involve all of our beings, then we will continue to grow to the point we love God for God. We understand the depth of his love, the vastness of his love, and that in itself fills us up. But you can't just wake up and say that. Or you can, but it won't be true. You have to go through the steps and the stages. But when it gets to the point where we look at God and see love everything we ever need, when we look at God and say, this is everything I ever need, one, that is reality. That is true reality. And two, that's when we become all flame. That's when our heart becomes flame. That's when our hearts looks at the people around us and it forgets itself. It forgets the self and looks at others and looks at love when they see others. Right? It's such a sacrificial giving. And it gets to the point where we don't even believe that we're sacrificing anything. We see giving as gaining. We see that. When we look around. You guys ever think that, there are certain people that you love everyone, right? But there are certain people that you love. You really, really love. Siblings, parents. That's great. That is really not love because it's linked with a certain type of gain. It could be the relationship. That person did something for you, which is a great way to start, by the way, because we love because he loved us, right? We love because he loved us, but there is growth. Because what's the goal? Our goal is to be like him, right? Is to be like him. So when that intense love that we feel to the family member or that special person, when it becomes the love for everyone you see, imagine how that would feel. Imagine how that would feel. It would be flames. It would be the world on fire. You who are the very fabric of my existence. This is Elijah at some point praying. You who are both my source and my end, my goal. You who are my joy. You know what it starts with? It starts with you. From where we are, which starts with I, me. What is he going to do for me? How am I going to gain in this? From that to you. Dialogue with God. You, him, we take his image. Say, God is, therefore I am. So that I is replaced completely by you. So he must decrease, he must increase, I must decrease, right? There's 100%, there's only a limited amount of real estate in the heart. Either you is more and he is less, or he is more and you are less. It gets to the point where the I becomes you. We see everything through God. He says, you who are both my source and my end. So this is not the teddy bear. It's the you who are my source and my end. My goal, you who are my joy. So in this story, this fire, after having gone through these levels, these layers for Elijah, means how, you see it in the story, and, without giving much away, everyone he comes around transforms. Everyone he comes around, every interaction is meaningful. All flame. We are put on this earth to become love. We are put on this earth to become him. Love is our vocation, our calling, our work to become love. And the circumstance in which that will happen, that will awaken in all of us is different. Elijah had to go through a certain path to get to that. We all have a different way of getting there, but we all need to get there. We need to be fire. When we put others first, when we love, we are the ones being transformed. Really. Right? So when you think about it, it is really the most logical thing that you can do. And when you get to that level, when the I becomes you, and you start saying, who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or peril or sword? Think about this. So who shall separate us from the love of God? So say you're happy about God. Say you're thankful. At the first sign of trouble, what happens? You're like, God, I thought we were cool. I thought we were cool. What's going on? Tribulation has separated us from the love of Christ. But when we get to the lowest part of the heart, and allow him to live there, then there's no separation. You just become one with God. Trials, tribulations, distress, none of that really matters. But when it matters, like the fact that you have certain problem, certain issue that causes you distress, you know what that says? That says there's ways to go. That we have to go and grow to get to the point where problems are no longer problems. And the difference between, say, Elijah at this point and us is that growth, is that transformation, transfiguration. He's no longer a caterpillar. He's transformed, transfigured, metamorphed to the butterfly. Love, there is no one like him. I didn't say it. There's no one like him. There's no it. It is the love that the world created, that we created. The love that we created, it has attachments. It's attached to things, right? But love, really, the real love is all flame. It's all fire. There's no one like him. He doesn't love, he is it. And we talked about this. One can only love. We can only love if we have a deep awareness of our own belovedness. I don't think belovedness is a word, but you know what I mean. We can only love if we have a deep awareness of our belovedness. When we know we're loved that much, when our heart knows in its depth, when it knows that much, then that's when we can love. And God's kingdom is completely different from what we think, right? His kingdom is sort of like an upside down kingdom. The last will be first, the first will be last. It says, my strength is made perfect in weakness. How's the last going to be first? How is weakness? How does that mean strength? God's logic is upside down our logic. Or maybe our logic is the upside down one. It might be the norm, it might be the one we're accustomed to. But we know that leads to death, right? I love our logic versus God's logic. I love the difference in Eastern thinking and Western thinking. Eastern is more heart. Western is more logic. So Eastern is more community. And Western preaches individual. The individual is the most important. I love some words in our language. You know what a homeless person is called in our language, in Amharic? Huh? Daha. Yeah, that's poor. But you're a Western thinker right there. What is it? Yene bite. What that literally means is my kind. My kind, right? Versus the homeless person. The individualistic mindset, the individual thinking, the homeless person. My kind. That comes from love. You see that person understand, that's me, that's my kind. And you know who else says my kind? Who else says my kind? He literally said, I am the poor. He literally identifies with the poor. He literally identifies with the poor. He didn't say, I'm like the poor. He's like, I am them. This idea of co-suffering versus I'm sorry for your loss. What does that even mean? I'm sorry for. Anytime I say that, I internally I cringe because I am sorry for your loss. It's all about me. I'm distressed because you lost something. So I'm sorry. Let's apologize to each other. Co-suffering. Co-suffering means to take the burden of that person, but it requires love for that to happen. It requires us to look a little outside of ourselves, a little outside of our circumstances. And, you know, this has been said over and over and over again, but we need to remember it. We need to remember it, and we need to remind ourselves over and over and over again. Because that 50 to 70,000 thoughts, those are saying individual. Those are saying me, 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 all about me, me, me. It repeats. So we have to continually remind ourselves. Like, for example, just preparing for this and thinking about this, when I went to work a few days ago, it was a different experience. I go in and talk to people, and like, it was no longer about me. It's like, just there's a co-suffering, and there's a beauty in that. But like the next day, I was back to thinking about me, you know. So like you sort of need to repeat it. You need to remind yourself daily, hourly, every minute, and that's where prayers comes in, right? Prayers are supposed to be continuous. Prayers are not just Sunday, Monday morning, Monday night, like morning and night. It's supposed to be continuous. Prayer is communication with God, right? And even think about that. It's communication. You know, let's say that dialogue with God, the dialogue, there's a suffix, there's two parts in it. The log is logos. So we're using logos to talk to logos. God is everything. The words we use is God to talk to God. To communicate, we need him. He's the medium to communicate. But that's why it's needed. It's continuously needed. All flame. Love is all flame. You got to think about the different characteristics of love that's written in the Bible. And it's not doable. When you think about it, it's really not doable without God. Patient, kind, no envy, no boast, not proud, no dishonor, not self-seeking, not easily angered, no records of wrongs, doesn't delight in evil, rejoices with truth, always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always preserves. It's heavy, but it's flame, it's fire. To get here, we have to go through the steps, the stages. It's a life journey. And the life journey, part of the journey is this as well. Part of the journey is the love and having patience while losing that patience and going to God and growing from that. It's all flame. And that's, in the end, that's what ends up staying. Love never fails. Prophecies will cease. Tongues will be stilled. Knowledge will pass. But love is an eternal flame. And how can we do that? How can we get out of this self-driven life? Self-serving life. There are a lot of things that we can do. Like I recently was talking to someone how I hate fasting, right? I hate it. I hate fasting. But come to find out that fasting is a form of love. My first response was like, damn. But why is that? Why is fasting a form of love? Who can answer? I heard something. Sacrifice. Self-denial. Because love requires self-denial. And fasting is an exercise of self-denial. The worst type I ever encountered. It's an exercise of self-denial. So if you can't do that one thing, how are you going to be patient? How are you going to be kind? It is connected. And this person I was talking to, everything is connected to love. It all eventually streams into love. But to get there, we have to trial. We have to go through the trials and tribulations. And trust me, if your thought is, trials and tribulations, just remember that trials and tribulations, the things that we're giving up, you're giving up death. You're just attached to death. We're just attached to death. That's all it is. The attachment to death makes us, it hurts when we give it up. But just because it hurts, don't forget that it's death you're giving up. Yes, it hurts, but it's death you're giving up. And sometimes, some of you, I promise you, you'd say, this doesn't appeal to me. That's part of the sickness, guys. Sorry. That's part of the sickness. The part of the sickness says it doesn't appeal. Part of the sickness lies to you, saying, no, if I stay here, I'll be happy. Isn't that part of the sickness? Part of the sickness says, it's always, what's next? Right? Part of the sickness needs for you to look forward to something, otherwise you're going to wake up. There's like a YouTube person that I used to follow and watch their videos, and they're no longer doing that, and they were like the most subscribed YouTuber, and at some point, and during an interview, that person said, when they got to the top, it's just like they weren't happy. There was no joy when they got to the top. But that person also said, you hear this a lot. You hear this from those who have achieved. When they got to the place, it's not what they thought. But even though you hear it, you still seek it. It's sort of sad in a way that it takes, you know how you have to go through the experience to understand it? Like there's a saying, like it takes time to know that we don't have time. It takes that experience to understand it. But although there are so many examples, and see the lives of the saints, see their joy, see they're all flame. But you're like, nah, I'm going to continue to pursue this that I know, well, I don't know, I've heard ends in misery. But hey, it's going to be different for me. But look, you don't even have to look at other people's experience. Look at your own experience. There was a time where you thought a certain place, when you got there, you'd be happy. And you've way past it. Your goalpost is now different. Your goalpost is always ahead of you. And why does the world do that? Because it knows once you get there, the jig is up. Once you get there, the jig is up. But what the world's trying to do is try to make sure you die before that. Before the jig is up, before you realize that, oh man, I'm chasing death, die. Before you're chasing death. before you get to that. But guys, God is here saying that's the story. Like he tells us over and over and over again. We know this. So why are we still struggling? It's the sickness. And the only one that heals it is God. So trust me, I know that change is scary. We run so much from change. We run from change and try our best to stay status quo. Just stick to what we know. But we talked about this last week. Change will happen. I promise change will happen. There is no status quo. Not that your life is great as it is right now. Let's be honest. Be honest with yourself. It's not that great. And if you think it is, you're being distracted. So you can't win this battle. But so you know that change will happen. As in, if you don't follow God, you're just not going to stay where you are. You're going to go the opposite way. And you don't want to do that. And you don't want to get to the woe is me. Sometimes people go, there's this, I forget the saying, but there's a certain twisted, sick joy in being like alone or miserable. Right? And if you don't relate to that, then that's fine. Don't go there. But you will get there if you follow the world, I promise. But what that does, the reason that happens is because it's I-focused. So like, you know how people say pity party, like, like online, I don't know if it's still a thing, it used to be like when I'm in the hospital, like, oh, picture. Like, give my good side. And the Band-Aid over here. Oh, the IV right here. Yeah, I get it. I need people's, for people to say, I'm sorry. People say, I'm sorry. Why are you sorry? Like, no, I feel bad for you. So, I'm sorry for you. Thank you. What is that? What is that? So there's the seeking of attention, seeking of approval from others. That will continue. But like, listen, even logically speaking, if that makes you happy, like you can't be at the hospital every day. People will just get tired of like, you know what I mean? Like, oh, you're still, like you're back in? You were just out like 2 days ago. So just as for us to remember that change will occur. Change towards becoming flame. Come on, that's appealing. And if it's not appealing for you, it's okay. It's because you're sick. But that healing comes from God. And so just know that. Make yourself believe of the truth. And your heart will follow. But just make yourself believe of the truth and do it. And your heart will follow. God will work his way into your heart and continue to heal. And then your eyes will open more. Our eyes will open more. We go towards flame more and more and more and more. And when we get there, guys, I can't really tell you because I'm not there, but I hear it's amazing. So that is all. So next week is going to be the last week for this. Sorry, I talk a lot and I probably went over the time, but it is what it is. Thanks.